But now the situation is changing. So almost 2 years right now after the tragedy, and we've been through several trials and investigations, and suddenly a surprise, because 17 officers of the Hellenic Coast Guard are being accused by a Greek prosecutor of what exactly?
Yeah, sure. So we had just a few days ago, we learned that the prosecutor at the Naval Court in Piraeus had finished a preliminary investigation and is recommending charges for 17 Coast Guard officers. So that includes the captain of the PLS 920, that's the Coast Guard vessel that was on scene on the night of the shipwreck. He's accused of causing the shipwreck, failure to provide assistance, and interfering with maritime transport. Those are some of the charges. We also have charges against the crew that were on board, and those are charges of complicity and all the, everything I mentioned before. And we also have even the chief, the then chief of the Coast Guard, being implicated in this, and the supervisor of the National Search and Rescue Coordination Center in Piraeus, which was in touch with the various vessels involved that night.
And 2 officers that were apparently on duty that night,
Yes.
the ones that were actually talking, right, to Adriana, the boat.
Yes.
And I don't know how much this impacted it, but recently, in March, I think, some recordings leaked from the coast, from those talks between this rescue center to I think it was to Greek press, right?
Yeah, News 24/7, I think that's what you're talking
Yeah.
about. So I think the important thing here is that this was from the investigation conducted by the Greek ombudsman, which was really the first independent investigation to be conducted by a Greek authority and completed after the shipwreck. And that was the report that came out, although it hasn't been released, it's not public. The ombudsman provided a press release with some of the core findings, and it is a scathing report. So it found many of the things that me and my colleagues found in our reporting, and that now appear to have been corroborated again by these charges by the Piraeus Naval Court. So I'll just list a couple of things. Negligence and dereliction of duty is one of the things that the ombudsman found. Delayed search and rescue response, which we talked about. And then the withholding of evidence, because there were key pieces of evidence, like data from the captain's cell phone that the captain of the PLS 920, that the ombudsman requested, that were not handed over. Also, captain's logs and various other things. So again, a pretty damning report that led up to these charges. And we also had the leaking of those audio messages that, to me, the biggest thing they corroborated is that the Greek authorities were trying to get both the people on the Adriana and people in merchant vessels who were nearby to say that the ship wanted to go to Italy, that the people on the Adriana wanted to go to Italy, and they wanted to basically create, a paper trail to be able to make this claim, even though, again, it doesn't stand. But they wanted to be able to make this claim that the people wanted to go to Italy, but especially in the call with the merchant ship, which was nearby, you can hear the person saying, they're not. It's bad conditions. This is not a situation for people to be in. So that was very helpful leading up to this. Now, can I add one thing about the charges, which is important? So the lawyers, advocates, of course, have welcomed this development. There are another 4 officers who were essentially let off the hook for kind of legally reasons that I won't get into, but lawyers are appealing that in order to bring charges against these 4. And also importantly, we should say that even though the criminal procedure has been initiated, this doesn't necessarily mean that this will go to trial.
Exactly.
So this is like, because of the way the Greek judicial system works, there are basically several phases. So from what I understand now, what happens is these 17 people will be questioned by a prosecutor who will then decide if this goes to trial. So we'll wait and see.
When it comes to evidence, what in your mind is the most damaging evidence here? The testimonies of the witnesses, the fact that the recordings, also, it really looks strange that no cameras were on this vessel, that they confiscated the phones of the survivors. Some of them were in those waterproof bags, right?
Yeah.
So that there was something, and suddenly they confiscated it. They couldn't find it for a long time. I think the lawyers had to intervene, and suddenly they miraculously appeared somewhere.
Although they were not allowed to be used in key cases,
Okay.
which is another interesting thing. And you mentioned the cameras on the Coast Guard vessel, which were there. And we have indications that they were functioning, but they happened to not be recording, even though they have a mandate to record, because this ship is financed by Frontex, and it is highly recommended that operations like this be recorded. But of course, the cameras were malfunctioning that night, conveniently. This is at least the explanation that the Greek authorities have given. I think there's so much damning evidence, and for me, I have seen that from the very beginning, because my colleagues and I were investigating this immediately, basically in the days after the shipwreck. And the testimonies of the people who were on that ship alone were so damning, and a lot of parts of it could be corroborated. And there was so much consistency. You don't get that kind of consistency when something isn't credible. Yeah, there's so much. I cannot tell you. It's hard for me to point to one thing. I have all these things that you mentioned running through my mind. We have, satellite data showing the movements of the ships, phone calls, communications, now leaked communications between the Search and Rescue Coordination Center and the Adriana, as well as vessels on scene. There is no shortage of evidence that points to what happened that night.
Yeah. It actually seems like almost everything the Coast Guard claimed is not true. They even claimed that the boat was still moving, that the engine was fine. And was it BBC who made this interesting piece? They just checked through this commercial app how the boats are moving, and they were showing that there were actually several boats around Adriana, right?
Yeah, and we also did the same with forensic architecture, which also used publicly available data to track where the ship was at what time, and you can see it stopping, backtracking, doing certain things that it would not be doing if the engine hadn't stopped. And then you see it speeding up at the points where the people claimed they were being towed. So I think even that evidence, in addition to everything else, also corroborates the stories of the survivors.
I don't want to be devil's advocate, but do you think it is possible that those officers had no idea what they may cause by doing those towing maneuvers? I don't want to say that they really did it on purpose to sink the boat, but as experienced vessel, right? A well-equipped vessel, sponsored, as you said, by Frontex. Were they really not aware what may happen if they towed this super old, not functioning boat with 750 people and start speeding with it?
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to what was going through their minds. I hope that their intention was not to kill 750 people on board. I think the intention was to tow them so that this would no longer be their problem. But listen, this is not without precedent. We had the Pharmakonisi incident in 2014, much smaller scale incident, but nonetheless, several people died during an apparent towing towards Turkey. So the Coast Guard certainly had reason to believe that this could go wrong, even if that hadn't happened. I mean, basic physics, I think, will tell you, and basic logic, that a boat like this will probably not be able to withstand a really quick towing.
Exactly, and we know that there were some boats closer. They could help, could call for more help, right, to take those people from the boat to some kind of smaller boats.
Yeah.
So there are many problems with that, but we started talking about the fact that there was an ombudsman investigation into this thing. There was, I think, European ombudsman investigation as well. But the big thing was a trial of 9 Egyptians, so-called Pylos 9. And when we spoke with Bill before, this was the big thing. Everybody was waiting for this trial. Can you tell us how did this go? Because this is also kind of a surprise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the backstory is that within 24 hours after the shipwreck, 9 Egyptian survivors are arrested and charged with causing the shipwreck and with smuggling. And this is not, a one-off. This is a trend that we see in Greece, the so-called criminalisation of people on the move, of asylum seekers, of migrants, where essentially when a boat arrives, 1 or 2 people are arbitrarily picked out of the bunch, often without any evidence, according to lawyers, and charged with being the smugglers and facilitating the journey. So this is what happened in this case. 9 survivors, were taken into detention, and from the very beginning, their lawyers were pointing out all the issues with the case. One really big issue was that the charges were based on the testimonies of 9 people, 9 other survivors. And we know from those testimonies that they felt pressured to name specific people as the smugglers. And keep in mind, there were 104 survivors. So 9, getting the testimonies of 9 survivors was not sufficient. The lawyers of the 9 were requesting that all the survivors be interviewed for this, and that request was denied. There were so many, to me, quite sensical requests, evidence that should have been in the case file, and those requests were denied. That includes the phone of the survivors. It includes communications of the Coast Guard. There was a whole list that the lawyers had provided to us at that point of all the requests they had made for evidence to be introduced, and every single one was denied. So in the end, the 9, their case, they ended up being let off on a jurisdictional technicality. They ended up being acquitted. And with my colleagues, we wanted to understand, okay, what was the evidence? Did Greece have any evidence to keep these 9 people in jail for almost a year? Because they spent almost a year in prison only to be, released one day on a technicality. And so we found that not only did Greece not have sufficient evidence, which is what the lawyers had been arguing all along, but actually it had evidence exonerating these 9 people. And that evidence was coming from Egyptian authorities, which were doing their own investigation into the smuggling ring behind that put the Egyptians, at least, on the Adriana. And we obtained about 700 documents, Egyptian documents from the Interior Ministry, from the prosecutor's office, which was basically the complete dossier of Egypt's investigation, saying, here are who the smugglers are. None of the 9 were included in that list. Egypt communicated that to Greece several times. We have evidence that as early as a month after the shipwreck, Egypt was reaching out to Greece and saying, hey, you have the wrong guys. Greece didn't respond. At one point, Egypt requested cooperation because there's a judicial cooperation agreement between the 2 countries, and Greece denied that request. So not only was there not sufficient evidence, but Greece was aware of exonerating evidence. And then we did a number of other things, like talk to the families, look at evidence of transactions that they had sent money to actual smugglers, look at voice memos. So there's no doubt that Greece had some of this information in their hands, but chose not to act on it.
Well, I haven't heard of the Egyptian part of it. I'm extremely surprised, and I cannot even put it in my head. How is this possible that a government reaches to you to show evidence? You should trust that they actually did some kind of a thorough investigation, and you should trust their knowledge, expertise, right? And
Especially
they didn't.
Yeah, and especially a country you have a judicial cooperation agreement with for several decades. But yeah, and if you ask lawyers and advocates, they will say this is not surprising because we have thousands of cases of people who are facing very similar charges of smuggling that are unfounded based on what they would describe as bogus evidence. So in a way, it's shocking to corroborate it, but it's not that surprising.
I wonder if there were other cases like this when governments of another country, for example, Egypt, investigated in other smaller tragedies, or is this a thing that only happens when it's as big as Adriana?
I'm not sure. I think because of the scale of the tragedy, and because especially at the beginning, it wasn't clear how many Egyptians had been on, excuse me, it wasn't clear how many Egyptians had been on board. There could have been many, there could have been hundreds. So I think the Egyptian government mobilized to basically find the people who are behind bringing these individuals from Egypt to Libya, where they eventually got on the boat. But I'm not sure about other investigations. This is the one that we really got access into and got all these documents that I mentioned and were able to review.
This was one of our summer shorts, meaning a short episode that is part of a larger one that we recorded during season 4. So if you're interested in this topic, you can learn much more by checking the full episode, and we will put a link to it in the show notes. And one more thing. ReFOCUS is part of a very big campaign called Where We Rise. It's us plus 29 other organizations that are trying to raise 1 million euros, yes, ambitiously, within 2 months for a grassroots organization movement. We are trying to do it for people on the move, people we supported for years, some of us decades, in Greece, in the Balkans. So if you can, please consider supporting this donation, this fundraiser. We will put all the links in the show notes. And please believe us when we say that any donation matters. It doesn't matter if it's €1 or 1,000 euros. It will really go to a very noble cause.